1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals the solution to almost everything. This is the promise of collective intelligence, and it's a promise that Lorraine Margherita articulates beautifully on this week's episode of the DesuckifyWork Podcast. Collective intelligence combines individual talents, skills, stories, and ambitions into something greater than the sum of their parts. It's activated by clarifying team purpose, roles, and responsibilities. It invites people to contribute beyond just their job description or credentials. And it allows diverse teams, even those with limited experience, to outperform smaller groups of experts. The key to all of it? Shared decision-making. It almost sounds counterintuitive, too many cooks and all that. But it doesn't mean everyone decides everything. It simply means you include those who will implement decisions in the decision-making process, which actually shortens the gap between decision and action and increases buy-in and effectiveness. Lorraine literally wrote the book on this, Shared Decision-Making in the Corporate Arena. And she explored over 40 frameworks organizations have used to get these results. I don't know about you, but with the world butt deep in problems, getting results sounds pretty good to me. Okay, Lorraine Margherita, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I am happy to have you on the show, and I'm excited to introduce you to some folks in the audience. Do you want to take a moment and just tell us a bit about who you are, what do you do for work, and how you came to be doing it?
Well, lots of questions in your question. So what I do, I am a collaborative organizational consultant. I'm based in Paris, and I work mostly with large corporations because they have large teams, different countries, and I like to work international. It brings more diversity and more fun into the work I do. And how I came to do it, it's actually a fun story because I was I would call a traditional consultant when I was very young. And I would always say for years after I left the organization and did some other things, I kept saying that the best moments in that part of my career were when I had a large group of people that we gathered to work on a new project or a new challenge or to try to find solutions to what they were doing or bringing together people working for the same company in different countries and stuff like that. And I would say these were the best moments. And it was just a few times among the assignments I was part of that we had to bring all those people together. And then many years later, I went to do some other things, and I realized that it was actually a job in itself, and that some people had the chance to have that kind of assignment every day. And so literally the next day, I created my company. So for American folks, it was on the 4th of July, which is which I can easily remember. And so, that's when I started to do that all the time, something like 13 years ago.
Was there something that was there a light bulb moment where you realized that could be a job? Did something help you see that?
I think I realized there was a difference between France, where I live, and the US, where I had lived, but not in that part of my career. And I realized that there was a difference in the way people were talking about consulting and facilitation. At the time, facilitation in French was not something that people understood. They had no idea what it was. But when I did realize that it was bringing people together and have them co-design the assignment with us, the consultants, was actually a way of doing consulting, I realized it was exactly what I needed.
So now that you're doing this and you've done it for a while, what role does your work play in your life?
Oh, wow. I think it's a big role. Not because I cannot stop working, because I do have other things in my life, and I'm very protective of my health, and I'm very curious, so I need to do many different things. I was never someone who could do one thing 100% of my time. But that being said, it takes a huge part of my life, because I think that the work we do with the organizations I work with is part of their role, not only towards their teams and their stakeholders, but toward what's around them. So society, the environment is part of the impact that they can have.
Mm.
So in that regard, I tend not to make a difference between what I can bring as a person and what I can bring as a consultant. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
I think so. I'd love to hear you expand on that because it's a really interesting concept. And I think the question I have is like, how do you do that while maintaining sort of some boundaries in your life between when you're working and when you're not?
Well, maybe a very pragmatic example of what I'm saying with a client. I remember one time, oftentimes I work with clients for a couple of days, and
Mm-hmm.
then we don't meet for a few weeks, and then we work again. And I remember someone coming back for the second day and telling me what you showed us and what we experienced yesterday as a team with you in a seminar with my peers. I
Mm-hmm.
talked about the foundation of that. It was collective intelligence, to make it
Mm-hmm.
short. And he said at dinner last night with my kids, we had a conversation about listening, sharing, and being part of something that none of us can do on their own.
Mm.
So for me, that means that, at the dinner table,
Yeah. Mm.
that's it's I guess the most personal place that you can
Yeah.
imagine in a family. So everyone comes back after the end of the day and shares what they've been doing and what's going on in their life. So that's a very good example. And for me, I think that when you learn about, I was mentioning listening, feedback, appreciation, lots of things that we use that are sort of the material that we use to work with clients and organizations. It is something that you can also use every day with everyone.
Yeah.
And that's when I say that there is not necessarily a boundary between my personal
Yeah.
life and my professional life. It doesn't
Mm.
mean that I work every night,
Mm-hmm.
every weekend. It's not the case.
Yeah.
But I do use some of my material, professional material, in my conversations and relationships with others in my personal life.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think, I don't know if we often recognize that, right? Like the lessons we can learn
Hmm.
in any aspect of our life, the best ones are probably ones that can cut across all areas of our lives, the kind of the most core truths of what makes being a human better, really. I mean, you talk about things like listening. Um, that's obviously beneficial anywhere. Um, yeah, I love that approach. And I think it definitely allows you to still set the boundaries where you need to set them. But it's just like when the lessons translate, the lessons translate. Um, this is the DesuckifyWork podcast. So I'm curious for you, what was your worst or suckiest work experience?
Oh, I have to say I didn't have that many, so
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I'm
Mm.
I'm one of those people who are happy to do what they do and to get paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess it will not be a surprise. I think that's the worst situations where when there was no alignment on what we were trying to achieve, it was mostly relationships, I guess.
Mm.
Because I was never in a position where I would not want to be in the organization or in that function.
Mm-hmm.
So it does happen to others, and that's why it sucks. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen to me. So I guess the worst moments were when we were not aligned on what we were trying to achieve, and there was conflict because the conversations were not about what they should have been about.
Mm.
And so there was unnecessary conflict, which is something that I have very little patience for.
It's the worst. I mean,
um,
right? It's the worst
yeah.
kind of conflict because you're you're still emotionally engaged, meaning
Hmm.
your system's still firing, it's still working,
Hmm.
but your brain knows like there's no point to this. It's not moving
Yeah.
us somewhere.
Plus, I think it takes a lot of energy, and again, it's useless.
Yeah.
So I'm someone that everyone describes as pretty energetic.
Yeah.
I can bring a lot of energy, especially when I'm working with people and we do something that we've never done before or that could sound impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all in.
Yeah.
Uh, what I'm not all in for is when we feel that it's not necessary to bring all that energy to do something that we're not going to be happy with.
Mm.
See what I mean? I can bring a lot of energy if we feel that that's what we need to do and we agree on doing it and we see the impact of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
If I feel that I'm giving energy to something that to someone is going to try to break it or
Mm-hmm.
to diminish it or make it smaller,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, it doesn't work for me. So I
Mm.
left. I left. It was the only way.
So when you now in your work, I imagine you occasionally notice or observe some of this behavior where the wrong
Mhm.
conversations are happening, and then people are maybe getting frustrated. Um, in the midst of that, what are some ways that you can help people shift to the right
Mm.
conversations?
It's a huge question. I think that in all the assignments I've had in very different countries and industries, I'm lucky enough to be able to work with different companies. I don't have a set industry that I work for or in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what helps even in outside of my own assignments when I do the research I did for my book, for example, I
Mm-hmm.
see that what brings everything back to the best place is why we do what we do,
Mm.
what it is we're trying to achieve, what it is that I need you because I cannot do it alone. And I alone can be a branch, can be a department, can be a function.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that notion that there is a place where we want to go and there is a reason why we exist to go to that place
Mm-hmm.
is probably I think it's the best starting point for many different conversations, especially when people are sort of lost or disagreeing on what they want to do.
Mm.
So I would use that as a really a starting point, yeah,
Do you find that
compass.
most organizations have the answers to some of those questions, meaning the why we do what we do and where we're pointing?
I love your question because what I found out is that oftentimes, so if we look at a few decades or years back,
Mm-hmm.
that notion of why, purpose, reason for being, sometimes internationally we use the French word raison d'être.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all that is, I mean, if you go to a company today and you talk about this, people have at least heard about those notions.
Yeah.
I think that maybe, 20 years ago, I don't think they would have heard
Mm-hmm.
about that notion,
Yeah.
which doesn't mean that it wasn't there.
Right.
It's like culture. People might not have realized, but they have a way to do things and they
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily think about it or realize it. But when they describe how they do things, there is something specific to that organization that is
Yeah.
unique. And so
Mm-hmm.
for that notion of why we do what we do, I think the answer sometimes goes back to the very creation of the company. When you look at, those companies that are like 100 years old, when
Mm-hmm.
you look back, the first person or a couple of persons who decided to launch a business, they had
Mm-hmm.
something in mind that was to, I don't know, fill in a gap or change something that was not working or add something to society or to
Mm-hmm.
the market.
Yeah.
And if you move to now, 100 years later,
Mm-hmm.
you can still see that it's still around, it's still there.
Yeah.
So I think there is a reason why a business gets started in the first
Mm.
place.
It almost sounds like I don't know, archaeology is the phrase that comes up to me. Like you're dusting off the stuff that has
Mm,
covered up the truth, the essence of
mm.
what's really there. You know, is that what's that process like to get to that truth of why the organization exists, what it's pointing to? Is it simply kind of going back and then trying to connect then to now, or is there more work to be done to connect those dots?
There are a lot of dots to connect because what it connects to at the very beginning is how each person in the organization sees that origin story. So oftentimes there is an origin story. People sort of know when the company was created, by whom and for what reason or in what circumstances. I don't think they think about that every single day, but I guess
Yeah.
it was it was maybe a big part, a small part of the reason why they chose that company, or why sometimes people tell you, it was sort of a random decision and I joined and 20 years later I'm still there. So they found something in that company that suited them. So I
Yeah.
think the first answer to your question is to connect all those perceptions of what that company is all about. So it's actually it's archaeology, because you go back to the roots of the company. So you go
Yeah.
back into the past. And yet, if you do that right now for the people who are now in the company, not 5 or 10 years ago, 50 years ago, but now, then I guess it comes up in a way. It connects, and it sort of shows in the culture of the company. I think it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, though.
I think it does. I mean, I think the broad answer, what I hear is, you kind of have to do the work. You have to get in there and
Yeah.
talk to people and hear the stories. What are they connecting? And then help people sort of put the pieces together, so that there's a sort of a unified story that they can all work from. Does that seem close?
It's unified because it's actually the combination of all their stories and all their perceptions.
Yeah.
And actually, what we're talking about is how to realize what the company is all about and why it exists. Sometimes I ask my clients, not all the time because some of them are not comfortable with that question, but sometimes we ask, what would the world be like if your company did not exist? Which is kind of scary for some of them. But I'm thinking that whatever we do, it's always a good starting point to say, okay, who is in the room, even if the room is the entire world? What are they trying to achieve? Who are they? What do they see from where they are? What do they know about our customers? What do they see about the market? What do they want to do next year? What are they afraid of when they see how the market or the world or society is evolving? So it always goes back to, who are these people and what are they doing together, so that we can actually try to guide that combination of skills and talents and ambitions and stories into something that is super powerful.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful blend of like whatever the core truth of the company was, and then kind of the lived truth of where it is, and then helping that all kind of connect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's really cool.
It's moving all the time. That's also the beauty of it. It's not just, archaeology is part of it because you uncover or realize or bring back to the present something that was there a long time ago. But it's actually not archaeology in the sense that it's alive. An organization is an organism. It's alive.
Yeah.
So what happens now with these people? Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm not the only one or the first one to mention that. I worked, that notion of living company, the living organization, the living company. It's a book, actually, like 30 years old.
Okay.
So that notion that organizations are part of something bigger and that they live with it, and so they connect with what's around. They have an impact on what's around, and they can also sense what's around and what's happening and new directions, or whether it's time to expand or time to focus, time to learn or time to accomplish or roll out what they know. So it's in that sense, it's not archaeology. It's really looking towards the future.
I like that. You mentioned your book just a bit ago. Can we talk about that a bit? Feel free to hold it up if you want and tell us.
I worked so much on it.
Yeah. So can you share the title?
Yeah, the title is Shared Decision Making in the Corporate Arena. And it's actually a journey. It started because when I work with my clients, I like to share frameworks, concepts, books examples
Mm-hmm.
in other companies or other industries. And so I would always gather information on autonomy, responsibility, and I gathered all that information year after year so that I could have updated examples to share with my clients. And then at
Mm.
some point, I realized I had a lot of material, and maybe I could share it with more than just my clients.
Yeah.
And that's how I decided to write that book. So it's a journey with stories of organizations that have started to to share the decision making with their teams in a variety of different ways. There are
Mm.
many different frameworks, many ways to start, many ways to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the book is all about.
Hmm. So the title is intriguing. The idea of shared decision making. Like I hear it, part of my brain says makes total sense. Part of my brain, you mentioned things like autonomy and all that stuff, and so then my ears pick up some tension there, like shared decision making, but yet how do I have autonomy in the midst of that? Where does the accountability lie? So
Mm.
how do organizations navigate some of that tension so that the best decisions are made collectively while people still sort of understand where they fit within all that?
Well, it's true that I think it's less and less true, but oftentimes when we talk about sharing the decision making,
Mm-hmm.
if you're one of the people who are used to making decisions, I understand that you might worry what it
Yeah.
means and what it means for you.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there was a video once by a company that rolled out Holacracy, which is one of the frameworks where you organize the decision making within among all the members of the organization. And that
Mm-hmm.
video was like, oh, so if we self-organize, then we don't need managers anymore, and it's going to be chaos, and it's going to be,
Mm-hmm.
just not working.
Yeah.
So sharing the decision making doesn't mean that you stop having certain people making decisions for others. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
different way to get organized in the decision making.
Mm.
So obviously, if it's a simple and quick decision that will impact three people, you don't need to gather the entire company.
Mm-hmm.
When you start a new project that will involve the teams, whatever the size of the teams and the size of the projects,
Mm-hmm.
I often say that my work is to remove the barrier between decision and action. And the way to do that is to bring in the decision making process the people who will implement it as early as possible. So
Mm.
it doesn't mean everyone. It doesn't mean that you're going to need to ask 1,000 people if we go that way or that way, or if we
Mm-hmm.
buy, our competitor, or if we launch a new product next semester. It's just that if you have people who will be involved in rolling out the decision, you might as well know what they see. We go back to what we were saying earlier. If you want to launch a new product, you may want to listen to the people who talk to your customers every day. You
Mm-hmm.
might want to talk to those who get their complaints.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that notion that you might need to listen to more voices than
Mm.
just the regular ones or the usual ones.
And what is then the framework for the deciding? Like where does you mentioned that there's some different ones?
Hmm.
Um, Maybe we can talk about a couple of examples. What are some examples of how that process works, and um, how do you? I like this idea of moving to action, right,
Hmm.
and shortening that window. I think that's probably another one of the most frustrating things in sort of large corporate structures is it can feel like that window is wide. So,
Yes.
how do some of the better frameworks help you close that gap? And what does the moment of deciding look like in that?
Again, huge question. So I might want to answer with two different types of I would say concepts or frameworks.
Okay.
My book shows that some organizations have started getting the teams involved, sometimes more on an intuition. Like a new manager would say, I don't like making decisions and then going to see people and say, this is the way it is. This is
Yeah.
not me. I'm not comfortable. The previous boss might have done that for his reasons or her reasons, and fine, but it's not me. I would like to do things differently. Or just to say, sometimes we hear the notion that people working in our organizations are grown-ups, so they can make decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
So they started with intuitions, and then they opened the playground, I would say. Lego is one of the examples examples in my book, but it's that notion that if they can decide if they want to buy a house or have a third kid, they might be able to decide if we buy a new machine for the plant or if we hire that new person who will be working with them every day. So it's more, they started someplace and then they, pulled the thread and created their own model. And it doesn't necessarily have a name, or there is no book, on a shelf that they would open and say, okay, let's start with chapter 1. So that's also, I think it's a very interesting message, because it also means that any company can start the way they want, as long as they do what matches their culture, their industry, their ambition. So I think it's a very positive message.
Yeah.
And then some of these people experimented so much, and that's a very important point. All these frameworks, I found more than 40, and I'm sure that there is even more.
Wow.
They started with experimentation. It's people did things, and then either they created a concept around their own experiments, or they wanted to try different things, and then it became a concept, but no concept was created in a book and then implemented in an organization. And so we have frameworks that were created by people who experimented with something in mind. The notion that they wanted to have a place where to me, it sounds like it should be very simple and very achievable, but unfortunately, I can only notice that it's not always true. They wanted people to be happy to come to work. It sounds pretty simple, huh?
Yeah.
Knowing the title of your podcast, we'll still have a little bit of work to
There's
get
some
there,
work to
right?
do. Yeah. Yeah.
So these people sometimes had in mind, we want to work together, and sometimes the notion, the founder of Holacracy talks about how to live and work well together. And so he experimented and built on sociocracy, which is also a model based on the notion of circles rather than teams or departments. And those people experimented so that they could come up with a framework and say, okay, this is what we did. This is what we experimented. This is the best way we found to do. One of the things is to make decisions. So if you want to do the same, here is the framework. And so the first type of examples I mentioned is organizations that started and created their own thing. And we have a second type, which is more a framework that can be identified. And so you can sort of realize if what you do matches what others have done before and how they called that framework.
So when you're working with folks, it could be either road. You find some are ready to just experiment and figure it out, and others kind of want to take something. Now, I imagine when they take something, there still has to be a little bit of that spirit of experimentation. Like, how is it going to work for us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's still a journey. It's not like, I guess every transformation is a journey. And so we oftentimes about going from point A to point B. So I don't think that it's most times it's really not a straight line. And so when you want to change the way to make decisions, again, it's connected to the culture, to connecting with the context around you. And so it cannot be just a series of boxes that you check. Yeah.
I wonder if sometimes it feels like that notion of checking the boxes is kind of at the heart of the frustration we have, because I think we want that, right? We want to just be able to like plug some new thing in, a new system, a new process, a new person, a new team, and go, now we have achieved some kind of corporate nirvana where everything is just wonderful. and that literally never happens. Like that's like it there's always some amount of process. It's always evolving, and it's always in need of improvement because we're human beings, but we seem to like put non-human criteria onto places where humans are. One, do you notice that? And then two, is there part of your work that helps people see that we can't do that, like get a mindset shift where you can start to embrace that this is more of a journey and less of a quick fix?
So your first question, it's interesting because when I was listening to you saying what you were saying, and it reminds me of clients. I've worked a lot with engineers, also other functions, but there were a few major assignments where I was working with engineers, and I remember that one of their issues. I remember a specific company at some point they had a performance plan that they wanted to roll out, and one of their issues was that they had, let's say, tools or blocks that they could use to do their job, and they would not use them. And so the leaders were trying to see how can we convince our engineers to use what others have done before. And the bottom line was that these people were never happier than when they had to create something new that no one had ever done before. So telling them, you know what, you can go faster if you use what another country or another entity has used in the past, or even what you have used in the past. It was not that much fun. So honestly, the notion that we just plug in and it works, I'm not even sure that it really is that attractive. And so it connects to the second question about their journey. I think that I've seen once a leader telling me, "Oh, you work on decision making." So we were working on collective intelligence and starting a new project. So organizing the team, the roles, the responsibilities, the objectives, the ambition. So the project was getting started. And he came to me and said, I hear that you talk about, you work on decision making, and I'd be interesting to hear more about those, organizations that use circles rather than departments or levels. And so we started the conversation, and then at some point he asked the question, how long does it take to actually turn a company into more of a circle-based organization? And I said, well, the least I can tell you is a few years. I knew that the answer was kind of sensitive. So I said, 3-5 years for your department around that project. And it's kind of a crazy story because he said that's much too long. And so he gave up the entire topic. And I'm thinking it's too bad because now we're a few years later. He could have gone much further in those few years. Maybe not change the entire organization, maybe not be a circle-based organization, but still he could have started with what we had done around the project already and the team, because we had tackled who are we, why do we do things the way we do them, and why are we around, what are we trying to achieve. So that notion that it's a journey, I think if you're not convinced by it from the very beginning, I don't see how you can actually start. And sometimes, they are in the journey already and they don't even know it.
Yeah. I think that's a really beautiful point, because I think if you just zoom out a little bit, you can recognize that you're actually in it. And that we're always in some kind of a journey, meaning we're never like at the end of something. We've never, you know what I mean? So I think, I don't know. I think a lot of the resistance, I don't know. I mean, I imagine there's some, the ongoing sort of time pressures of work these days can make 2 to 3, 5 years sound the same as forever. But I think there's this, like, people have this desire to I want things to be fixed. I want them to be, done. I want to get some things off my list because I'm so busy. And yet I think what you're saying is, like, at least part of what I hear is this is not the thing you check. This is the foundation of everything. This is the thing that carries us. And then there are things we can check off our list every day when we are in this journey of constantly improving and iterating. Is that
Sure.
close?
Yeah, I think you're right. What
Yeah.
you're saying makes me think of a leader I listened to in a conference a few weeks ago. She's a very amazing woman, and she was mentioning that she wouldn't like to have a job where there is no problem or nothing to solve or no issue or problem or major crisis.
Yeah.
And it sort of made me realize, I guess, what we already know, but it made me realize, yes, some people are happy to have problems to solve. They're not necessarily interested in a job where there is little to solve or little to to face. There is no challenge. So maybe what you're referring to, and that I hear a lot, and maybe AI is going to change some of that, I'm not sure, is when it's too often or too much. If you're a leader and you're happy to solve crises and to run here and there to do your job and to have a busy life, that's one thing. If you have 5 crises a day, I think it's another thing, and maybe it's not necessarily, even those people who like to be busy and to solve issues and to face crisis, maybe that's too much. So I hear a lot about too much work, too little time to do what we have to do, a lot of pressure, a lot of short-time thinking, which obviously doesn't, if we connect to the beginning of our conversation, doesn't really help reflect on how do we speak to each other, how do we listen, how do we give feedback, how do we make decisions.
Yeah. And I think to another earlier point, there's like this idea of, I want to be working on the right problems. Like, you talked about having the right conversations and getting, even having conflict over certain things that feel useless. That's part of what I think people is like, is this what really matters? If I could focus my day, almost exclusively on big, juicy problems that matter, I'm happy. But if you start throwing in a bunch of other problems in the mix, then I struggle. Yeah. I know we've talked a little bit here about the idea of collective intelligence. I want to give you a chance to expand on that. So what is collective intelligence, and how does it help us within organizations?
Well, it's that notion. For me, it's material. Collective intelligence is in the room when I step into a room and there is, I don't know, 50 or 100 people, or even 10. That being said, I often say that bringing people together in a room and sitting around the same table every Monday morning doesn't make a team. So it's once you have all those people, the talents, the skills, the stories, the ambitions that they have and what they want to achieve, you get organized so that they find their place into something bigger than themselves. So that's how I would describe it.
And how do you help activate it so that it's not just 10 people in a room? It's really harnessing that collective.
Well, if it's helping a team sort of restart or start, we go back to the reason why they are in a team and what they're trying to do, where they are, why these people at this place now.
Yeah.
And then we work on their roles and responsibilities and see if there are gaps or if there are overlaps sometimes, or if it's not clear or if they're not looking into the same direction. And so once we work on that, we work on the different areas where they have to take action, either a few people in the team, the entire team, one person in the team, and then we organize how they make decisions to accomplish whatever actions they have to take as a team. So, said like that, it's a few sentences, and I would say it sounds fairly simple. And I guess, every organization at some point has wondered, who do we want in the team? What are we trying to do? What do we do next year? What are our resources and everything? And yet, I guess maybe partly because of what you were saying earlier, the number of issues that they're facing and the number of tasks they have to tackle, plus people change, come and go. The market changes, the resources change, the teams are not the same. And so sometimes it requires some work, and I really believe it's much easier when someone from the outside comes in to help them step back and say, okay, who are we and what are we doing and how are we doing it? And is it actually the best way to spend our time? Oftentimes it goes back to, okay, we spend, I don't know, 2 hours in this meeting, 10 people, it's 20 hours. Is it the best way to use those 20 hours? Do we need 20 hours?
Yeah.
So it sounds simple.
Yeah.
But in the context of the everyday, work life and leadership life, it can be tricky because we're just humans also. So
yeah, it does sound simple, but it's also like if you've existed in an organization, you realize it's really not. Meaning there's so many layers to it, and you mentioned the outside perspective, and as you were speaking, one thing that came up to me is that we often, and this again may be because of the pace of business, we don't always take time to really know what each person can bring. Meaning we kind of know their job title, their function. As if I'm putting 10 people together, I might know 2 of them really well. So I know definitely bring them in because but the rest, it's kind of like I'm just sort of guessing based on their function and my very top level intuition around what they bring. And is part of your process to help teams really understand what individuals within their teams can bring so that you are making more informed decisions when you're putting them together in teams?
absolutely, I know what you're saying because I think it is so true. And yes, they oftentimes it's the part of the work that they like actually. When you start saying, okay, we're going to have to change what we're doing or how we're doing it, it might create some anxiety or resistance. But when you tell people, okay, tell us about yourself. So I don't start a session asking people to open up because for some of them it's not that comfortable.
Sure.
But that notion that we want to respect and acknowledge the person and maybe discover, sometimes people have stories in the past or a hobby or something they did when they were younger or and when they have a chance to share, sometimes people rediscover who they thought they knew.
Yeah.
So that notion that we want to acknowledge what people are capable of and what motivates them and what they have achieved in the past is always super powerful. It's a good moment in that kind of work.
Yeah, and I imagine certainly in my experience, like you said, that it's really enjoyable to have those conversations to see someone feel comfortable to start opening up about who they are, and as the person on the receiving end to actually get to open your vision a little bit around who they are. It deepens the relationship, and so much of business is obviously relational, but it also obviously then changes when I'm thinking about doing the work. It's like, oh, she has this really interesting background. She had this really interesting experience at her last job. That would be really useful to have in the room here. And it gets me thinking about sort of some of the movement around ideas like inclusion and belonging and welcoming and all that stuff that gets talked about, and different people have different opinions. But I think at the core, if you want to uncover, on top of all the sort of human reasons to think about those things, the business reason is showing up in what you're saying here. It's like the more we welcome people, allow them to feel included, invite them to feel included, and get them to feel more open to share who they truly are fully. And this even goes back to like, I'm not just the work version of me. It's all of me. Now I have access to so much more from each person. And now the teams I put together, I imagine, get exponentially stronger as a result. And now I would assume that if you could measure the collective intelligence, and I don't know, can you measure collective intelligence? But I would imagine it would go up.
Measuring may sound ambitious. That being said, knowing the conditions, I talk about that when I share about collective intelligence with my clients. I tell them about different studies. Some of them are getting old now, actually, like maybe 15 years, 20 years. There are a number of stories where or studies where we can realize what makes a team or group work better together than others. They have compared the conditions, and so we know some of the conditions that help teams work better together. So measuring is difficult.
Yeah.
What we know is that the collective intelligence is higher than the sum of the individual
Yeah.
intelligences.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not about. There are plenty of fascinating stories about what a group can achieve that the sum of the individuals could not. So even if you are less experienced and you work in a certain way together, you will have a better results than a smaller group of people with a lot of experience, for example. That has been documented. That's fairly fascinating. And what you're saying actually is also, imagine the possibilities that it opens when you start. There is a game that we use sometimes to make people feel, experience really what it's like to work together and to achieve something really big together.
Yeah.
If you start thinking about the different ways in which the same person can contribute, it's not just their function, the description of their job, and the very thing that they were hired for. It's actually when you tap into different skills or different experiences, including outside of work. It can be a language, it can be the knowledge of a place that you've never been to, and I don't know, you're opening a store someplace. There are so many ways in which you can in which you can imagine that every person has more to bring than shows, even on their resume. And so if you start opening up to everything that you could benefit from if you listen to these people and realize what they're capable of, and if you plus there is a multiplication effect. I don't know if that's very English, but it's the notion that if you start getting people to feel listened to and you open up so that they can actually bring more than what you would expect, they will do much more. They will feel motivated, they will feel engaged, they will feel useful, which is something very important to every human being on the planet. And so it adds to, it's not only you benefit from everything all these people could do together, but it's also they're going to be willing to give more, to do more. They will be more creative. They will have many more ideas about how to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. They might even open up a new business that you didn't know you were capable of starting. So it's endless. When you start combining all those possibilities, it's just endless.
Yeah, it's really it's fun. It's a fun exercise to start like thinking about all the ways that it can spark more from people collectively, the organization, and then you get out to the whole, like the world, like, and that's like where I start to think like, what are the opportunities in front of us if we can really tap into our collective intelligence within different organizations and groups and countries and whatever? What becomes possible that isn't if we're not really harnessing that?
I think that one of the things that comes to mind is that we can do so much better with what we have and what we know. The more, I don't know if it's about getting older, but I really think that we can do so much better. What we're talking about, a collective intelligence, what does it change? How does it work? We have the answer. We have the example. Some of when we talk about, so self-management is more for smaller groups, but you can have many small groups in a large group. So it's, virtually any company can go that way. But even without going into complete self-management, just the notion that you let people do what they were hired to do, which again sounds fairly simple. We know we have examples. It sounds new or it sounds, different to many organizations, but some of the people I was telling you about have started doing what they do 50 years ago, 5 decades, in plenty of different industries and countries. So we have the information, we have the knowledge. we have the ability.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we can do so much more. So that's why I find it difficult to admit that we still have issues with so many people not being happy at work,
Yeah.
because I'm pretty sure we have what is required to not be in that situation. We
Mm.
could stop being so overwhelmed by work.
Mm-hmm.
There is a story I'd like to share about that comes to mind. I once a year I work for an association pro bono, and
Mm-hmm.
last week I was with one of them. It's a very small association, and at some point we asked the question. They had something they wanted to achieve, and I asked the question, what could you stop doing if you want to achieve that goal? And the other
Mm-hmm.
questions were about what will you continue doing? It's fairly classic
Mm-hmm.
questions. So what will you stop doing, continue doing, and start doing? And
Mm-hmm.
for the first time in my life, I heard them say, what could we stop doing? We have no idea. There is
Mm.
nothing we do that we could stop doing. Everything we do is necessary. We need to do it. It was the first time I heard that.
Mm.
And it's not a surprise. It
Yeah.
happened in a very small team with very
Mm-hmm.
limited resources.
Yeah.
And when we ask that question in larger groups with larger people, with a larger number of people, and I'm not pointing or judging anyone, but it
Yeah.
makes sense that when you have a lot more people, a lot more departments, and then countries and functions, there are places where things are done that are either not necessary anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and the information is not updated. So
Yeah.
we keep gathering those data about whatever, and we keep sending them to whoever.
Yeah.
And then when you ask, so what could you stop doing? People usually like that moment
Mm-hmm.
in our
Yeah.
work.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
association was like, this is so hard. And at the beginning, I didn't realize, why is it so hard? Usually people enjoy
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, we can stop doing this, we can stop doing that. This is going to be so
Mm-hmm.
much better. Our life is going to be easier.
Yeah.
So I think we have a lot of things to make our work better if we work together better. We have a lot
Yeah.
of resources, all of
No,
us.
I agree with you. I think it's simply taking those moments to ask those questions. And I think
Hmm.
we
True.
just keep going and then we just blow up and get frustrated at times, but we never have that moment. And that is, I think, the value sometimes of an outside person or organization to kind of come in
Mm.
and give you space to simply say,
Yeah,
like, what would you stop? And then it's like, well, I would stop these 5 things like right away. And then maybe 2 of them, somebody raises their hand and says, well, I think they're important. Okay. Then we can stop
exactly,
those 3.
exactly.
But I think we
Absolutely.
all have some percentage of our work particularly when you're in with an organization, like that you just kind of go, why am I doing this? Does this actually matter? But yeah, it takes the pause button once in a while
Yeah,
to
yeah.
kind of come in. Yeah.
Which is super difficult. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm just like you. I can see those organizations and the
Mm-hmm.
pace and the pressure and the changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see it's very difficult when you say, okay, we're going to take 2 days. And this is something I have in mind all the time. If you ask just a leadership team, 10 people, 2 days,
Mm-hmm.
that's 20 days
Yeah.
that are going into that work. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, we want something pragmatic and useful to come out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
while they are away, most of the time it's nice to be outside of the company, to have that kind of, to tackle that type of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when they are outside of the company keeps running, and issues keep coming up, and
Mm-hmm.
questions and emails, and so yeah, it is difficult to stop and say, okay, what are the questions that we could ask ourselves? And I
Mm-hmm.
often say that I hear that it's a big effort. It takes a lot of effort to stop and say, okay, we're going to spend 2 days asking
Mm-hmm.
questions and making new
Yeah.
decisions. Some of the decisions can be to stop things, as we were saying. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily what are we going to add to what we
Mm-hmm.
we have a hard time accomplishing already.
Yeah.
But I often think that, and I'm not saying that those organizations never do it, but it's a moment when you definitely have to stop for 2 days or maybe more, and then I see that the benefit that they take away from those 2 days is absolutely compensated. in the next few weeks or months. So
Yeah.
if you take 2 days to stop and to pause and to realize what you're doing and where you're heading, and if it's actually the best way to get where you want to go, I really see the benefit in in terms of time and energy and engagement. So
Yeah, I feel like on some level we can recognize that when we're within an organization, but it's very like there's a lot distracting us, all of the day-to-day stuff, and so you really have to like be thoughtful and intentional about, okay, what would be useful right now, so that we're not just continuing to do what we're doing, and then maybe you're now in the mindset to go, yeah, I can take 2 days because I know that it will pay off. But when you're in the midst of it, it sounds crazy. You tell me you're going to get like my top people and just have them sit in a room somewhere for 2 days.
They do, it's not just the head. We're trying to bring in the body as well and the emotions as well. But I hear you. It's 2 days outside of what they would, they have plenty of things they could be doing during those 2 days.
Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting because maybe some of what the body is telling us in that moment is like, I think you're in this sort of almost perpetual fight or flight mode when you're just going, and the last thing your body wants to do, or it doesn't believe it can stop. It's like, so helping people to calm down for a minute, take a beat, and then go, okay, then you can bring all of you into that space. Yeah, but it is hard, but it's not complicated, I guess is the thing. We know what to do.
They do it, they do it. It's it's an effort, but they do it. And also in what you're saying, it's also I can see and again, no judgment in what I'm seeing in the organizations I work with, but it's true that when you have a lot of pressure and you have a lot to do, I guess some of us feel more comfortable being active, being, in the action, rather than wondering, is this action the best use of my time right now, individually and collectively? It's also, avoiding some questions that might not be super comfortable asking, not to mention answering. So I think that's also part of the story.
No, totally.
To keep doing what we've done, and okay, we have to finish this, and then we'll see how it went. But then it takes more time. So okay, we'll see how it went when it's finished. So more time, and that's how we, what's the name of that bias about the sunken cost fallacy? So it keeps taking more time and spending more money and taking some of the resources in the team. But then now that we have achieved that much and we've spent that much time and money and resources, we want to go to the end. And unfortunately, it's an example when it might be a better decision to stop and realize, okay, we have actually spent whatever we've spent. Is it actually still the best way to go? Or should we move, stop, try something else? It's super difficult. So maybe it's more comfortable to keep doing what you know how to do.
Yeah, I think it often is, even though I think it's clear that it can be really beneficial to stop and pause and put some different thought and feeling into it. I want to kind of zoom back down to like the individual really quickly. Like as people think about how to manage their career in a world where hopefully we're relying more on collective intelligence and shared decision making, how do you, like, what can we do to sort of demonstrate that we are fit for that? Because I don't think the old models of this is just my resume and the tasks that I accomplished, and that doesn't feel like it paints a fuller picture. How can we paint a fuller picture of ourselves so that people go, you're gonna expand our collective intelligence massively?
I wish I had all the answers to that question. I might actually switch jobs and I think I think that what you're pointing to is how to understand what a human person, a human being, can achieve,
Mm,
and not only because and we all know that degrees and certifications are necessary, and yet
mhm.
they are not the end of the story. They're just
Yeah.
part of the story.
Hmm.
So I think that a lot of places have already realized that hiring people is not just picking, a certification. And I know that again, AI is also helping to realize what people can do because it can maybe, handle more information about a person, and
Hmm.
maybe there are. I know of a program where they specifically help organizations to hire people precisely not because of their certifications or degrees or
Hmm.
schools, whatever, um, but also because of what they've done. You don't get a degree when you handle a difficult project in another
Hmm.
country, and
Yeah.
yet if you are the future employer of that person, you'll be happy to know that they have done
Mm,
what they've done.
yeah.
So I know that some experiences have been started in the last few years. Some of them are not that young, they've been around for quite a few years,
Hmm.
trying to see people as more than a resume, even
Hmm.
if you write at the end, what kind of hobby and what
Yeah.
place you live in, and if you have a dog.
Yeah.
So I think that we are opening to a lot more than previous generations.
Yeah.
That being said, it's super difficult because first of all, it means that the person needs to speak about what they've done. Sometimes when you say, I've had this experience myself, if you live in a different country and you come back to your country, part of your experience sort of gets people confused. They
Hmm.
cannot know everything about
Yeah.
you, and not even and they cannot summarize everything about you.
Mm,
So it's also how you present yourself, what you say about yourself based on what you would like to do.
yeah.
So this is a yeah, so I'm not an expert in hiring people, and I know it's a very difficult business
Yeah.
indeed.
I think it'll be interesting to see how this continues to develop. I mean, I think
Mm,
you mentioned there's folks doing it. AI is helping people maybe sort through their stories a little bit. I think even the sort of world of personal branding is an effort to
mm,
do this. I don't love
true.
personal branding because it can often show up as fake um, but when it's
Agreed.
done well, meaning it's done from I'm helping you really see who I am and I'm just trying to help you see the full story. I think that's part of what that effort is about. I'm more
Mm,
than simply my resume or even my LinkedIn profile or my website or whatever else I have. Like I want you to see all sides and facets of me.
mm.
So yeah, I don't imagine any of us has the perfect answer to that question, but
No.
it'll be interesting to see how that evolves as it needs to allow us to get the right people in the
Mm.
right places. Yeah. So I've been asking you a number of questions, Lorraine. I want to give you a chance to flip and ask a question for our audience. Do you have something that you'd be
So
willing to
yeah,
ask them?
I actually it flows from a game I did with at a conference. I had 150 people in the room, and I wanted them to feel what it's like to be part or not be part of a decision.
Mm,
And so, if I had a question to ask for your audience, I would like them to share how they feel about the way decisions are made in their organization. So it can be
mm,
in their team, it can be any kind of organization, and it can be at a smaller scale. It doesn't necessarily speak about the entire organization, but I
mm-hmm,
would like them to share how it feels when they think about how decisions are made, when they hear about a new project, or we're
mm-hmm,
hiring someone, or we're cutting costs, or we
mm,
are spending money,
mm-hmm.
or I don't know, the traveling policy. I don't know, any
Yeah.
any kind of decision that is part of the life of their team. How does it make them feel? I
Mm.
would be very curious to hear
Oh,
their
I like
answer.
that. I like that question. I I can feel some of it in me from when I was within organizations. At times, frustrated is a word that comes up for me. At times, confused. Where did that come from? Often, and at times, not included. Like, like why weren't we at least given a chance to? And this obviously comes back to all of your talk about shared decision making. It's like you often feel like would have at least liked to have had a chance to voice my perspective, even if I knew I wasn't going to be the one to sort of push the button on the decision. Yeah, that's a really fun one. I'm excited to put that out to people.
Great. And it makes me think, if I have time, if you're a leader, manager, you have responsibility, you have people that you want to onboard when you start a project, or it's just, how next week is going to unfold. Think about that moment when that person, I was hoping you would say, I felt surprised sometimes, but it can be a nice surprise, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that same person, how they feel when they hear about the decision. So it might be late and they're confused or they're unhappy, frustrated, as you said.
Yeah.
They can be happy, or they can, if it's at the very beginning, they can feel happy that they were asked, what do you think? What do you see? What do you want to share? What would be your decision if you were the decision maker?
Yeah.
And so imagine these people when you start your week, your project, your new company. How will they behave once they have felt that emotion?
Yeah.
And you have so many possibilities to change the outcome of your teamwork.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's simple. I'm not saying it's easy. But again, if you think before you start the decision process, there is so much you can do so that when the action comes, your teams are much more engaged and happy, motivated, brilliant.
So, that's a really good framing. I think we think sort of intellectually like, oh, they're going to be upset maybe when I make this decision, but we don't think sort of experientially, what is that going to mean? If they're going to be upset for even just a week, what are they going to do during that week while they're upset about that decision? Probably not as much or be as engaged as they could be. So the cost is often greater than simply a passing emotion. It actually lives with us. Yeah, I love that. So we talked a lot about different facets of work, and I love so much of what you're sharing, and it makes me wonder, like, if you could just kind of wave a magic wand and create a fully desuckified world of work, what does that world look like?
I guess all of us are trying to do that without a magic wand. That's why it takes time. I was thinking about that question. I think for me, what came to mind was the combination between people who would feel that they can do more and keep learning and keep experimenting and keep trying and creating. And so that notion that they go to work, whatever their work is, with possibilities that are open to them. And so they feel that they will contribute to something that is bigger than themselves and turn that thing into a reality with others around them, with that notion that they can bring whatever makes them who they are, not just their degrees and their skills, but also their personality, everything they bring to work. And that would be combined with organizations that benefit from the potential, all those combinations. So it's a win-win because individuals feel that they can expand their knowledge and their experience, and they will be listened to, and all their abilities will be included in what's being done, and the organizations will actually achieve more and have a better impact, because having an impact is one thing. We want to have a good impact, so positive impact. And so I think that's the combination of the people and the organizations bringing each other what the others need. That would
sounds pretty good to me.
A lot of places. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty wonderful. Speaking of sounds, one of the things I like to do also on the show is I add some sound effects to the beginning and the ends of episodes.
I noticed.
I do cats and some other stuff.
So many cats.
I am inviting you to contribute to our sound effects.
So I'll be honest, I had a hard time with that question. I wasn't sure which one to pick. And what I don't know if it's okay because it's not really a funny or goofy sound, but what I felt like bringing was this sound. Does it work?
Love it. That's perfect. One, it's a pleasant sound. It's not, it disrupts without being jarring. And for all the reasons that you've talked about, I think it's a really nice sound. And it will definitely be included in the, probably during the intro, we'll hear those bells chime in. So I appreciate you
listening to it.
bringing that in. And then, the only other question I have, you've obviously shared a lot of amazing stuff here, and I'd love for people to have a chance to find you. So what are the best ways for people to find you?
The two best ways are my LinkedIn profile, so Lorraine Margherita, easy to find. And then I have a website, codynamics.net.
Okay.
With a dash between the co and dynamics. And where I share about my work, the conferences, interviews, the book, of course, and a few articles.
Awesome.
So that's the best way to see what I do and reach out to me.
Awesome.
I'll be happy to hear, especially the question that you asked. I'm really looking forward to seeing what people say. Yeah,
me too. And I'm gonna I'll post all of that in the show notes as well as a link to your book and anything else we want there. I just want to say thank you, Lorraine. This was a delightful conversation. It really got me thinking about the ways organizations can work together in some different ways than I've both experienced and even imagined. So I really appreciate you. Open my eyes and hopefully. Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you for your show and for all I appreciate that you give us time to talk about these topics, and the combination of each episode really brings a lot of, great insight on how to make work better.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for your podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Lorraine for bringing thought-provoking insights to the show. You can follow Lorraine on LinkedIn and check out her site at co-dynamics.net/en, where you'll learn more about collective intelligence, shared decision-making, and her amazing book. If you enjoyed the conversation and would like to dive deep into some of your own challenges at work, I invite you to schedule a free half-hour discovery session where you can explore new, desuckified possibilities for your future. Bye, everyone.